We are the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East, the authority for short. We were formed after Hurricane Katrina to bring a more professional, expert oversight to the operation of various levee districts. So before Katrina, the levee districts that protected the east bank of the river in the metro New Orleans area were 3 in number: East Jefferson, Orleans, and the Lake Borgne Levee District. Following Katrina, those districts were consolidated under the umbrella of the Flood Authority.
And what kind of accomplishments have occurred in the last 10 years?
So we have $14 billion plus in perimeter protection that did not exist prior to Katrina. So the area is much better off, much more well protected than prior to Katrina, number one. Number two, the authority, as a regional authority, is able to provide a consistent, integrated oversight of that system, which I think provides much better protection for citizens and property.
What are some of the issues going forward, for instance, 100-year flood protection?
So most of the components of the system that have been built by the Corps have been turned over to us. There are still some remaining. And it's our job to effectively, professionally, efficiently manage and operate those structures going forward. That's our responsibility. And in fact, the authority is the government entity with the sole mission of protecting citizens east of the river against flood and storm risk. We take that responsibility very seriously.
You know, as people have been watching for almost the past 8 years, 9 years, as the Corps has been constructing the new hurricane storm damage risk reduction system. Almost every single component of that work is done, with the exception of 2 major things that are left to do. One is the resiliency component, which is adding armoring to the levees. That's underway right now. And also underway right now, scheduled to be completed sometime in 2017, are the new pumping stations at the mouth of the outfall canals. But as people have noticed, I'm sure, the system that we have in place today is much more robust than what we've had before Katrina. But it is important to realize that there are limitations to the system. It's designed currently for a 100-year event or a 1% annual chance exceedance event. Of course, Mother Nature can always give us a storm that could be significantly more powerful than that. And so, people still have to be vigilant and understand that, this whole idea of risk reduction it's a shared responsibility. Government can do so much to reduce the risk, but, when it comes down to having to deal with some of these really severe storms, it's still necessary to evacuate in order to protect your life, to protect your loved ones' lives and your neighbors' lives. We still have to evacuate in those large storm events. From 2006 to 2011, there can be no denying it's just an unprecedented time for construction on flood control works here in the metropolitan New Orleans area. Every time you looked around, there was something going on, something big going on. And of course, it disrupted traffic, disrupted neighborhoods to some extent, but a lot of progress was being made during those years. But we've got to remember that, it just didn't all of a sudden pop up when we had this new system. It took some time. So by 2008, the Corps had pretty much gotten things back to the way things looked prior to Katrina when it came to the actual protection that the city had. And of course, in that year also, we had a hurricane that came through. In fact, we had a couple. But Gustav was the one that impacted us the most. And the picture that you see there on the right and down below there is in the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal. And so 2008, the surge barrier wasn't in place. And as a result, you see we had some overtopping of the walls there in the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal. We also had a bunch of vessels that broke loose in the canal and kind of floated and bumped around, if you remember. One of the main reasons I think I want to emphasize, though, is that the reason that we didn't flood for Gustav, even though we had these really high water conditions in that area, is because the Corps had installed some erosion protection at the base of those flood walls. And as a result of that, even though the water came over, it didn't wash away the materials behind the walls, and the walls didn't lose their integrity and therefore fall down and flood the city again. Then in 2011 or so, pretty much all of the system was up and functioning. It wasn't necessarily complete from a construction perspective, but nonetheless, it was able to provide the new 100-year level of protection, or risk reduction, I should say. And that's basically what the system looks like today. And so the yellow lines that you see there, that's the perimeter system. The red lines are the federal levees interior to that still have to function in order for the system to work properly. And those green lines that you see are the non-federal levees that we are in the process of certifying now. So one of the key things that was built starting back in 2009 was the surge barrier and the gates that go with that, as well as the Seabrook structure. And that facility keeps the surge away from the city. But, you know, the city is about 12 miles from where that surge barrier is, and the maximum surge occurs up against this barrier for most of all of the storms that come at us and create problems. And to kind of give you an idea of the differences in what we have today compared to what we had back then, the wall on the left is the wall that provided the protection for Katrina. It's at an elevation between 12 and 14 feet, and that was all we had back during Katrina's time. And actually for Gustav, that's what we had as well. Now what we have is that flood wall and the barrier. The flood wall right there is at an elevation of plus 32 feet. The barrier is at 26. It's designed to overtop, and of course the IHNC GIWW corridor is designed to provide a storage basin for any water that comes over that barrier for the 100-year or 500-year event. So, fast forward to August of 2012, and we have another hurricane that comes at us, and this one was Hurricane Isaac. Okay, and the difference that we have between Isaac and Gustav was the amount of work that had been done by the Corps to construct the new system. As I said, in 2011 it was basically in place, so in 2012 it functioned and we did not flood. Okay, so the surge barrier kept the surge barrier and Seabrook structure kept the surge from getting into the IHNC corridor. We had higher levees and flood walls and floodgates that kept the overtopping from occurring in some of the other areas, and we also had the interim control structures at the outfall canals, which prevented the surge from going up those canals and perhaps overtopping or overstressing the walls that are still out there. So we didn't have this situation at all with the overtopping of the walls in the IHNC. In fact, the water level only got up to about 4 feet in the IHNC for Hurricane Isaac. So the barrier did its job very well. This is the Carnarvon floodgate right here, okay? And this replaced a much lower floodgate and wall down in the lower part of St. Bernard Parish. That's the approximate height of the water against that gate for Hurricane Isaac. And so had that gate not been there, it would have overtopped the old wall and of course flooded into St. Bernard Parish. And so that kind of gives you an idea of you know, with the kind of protection that we have there today. Now, I would be a little bit remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the fact that we also had these other events outside of hurricane season that have occurred. The most significant one of which occurred in 2011, and that's when we had a really high river. I would say probably a flood of record, or really close to a flood of record. And as you can see on that chart right there, the river was over 17 feet at the Carrollton gauge for about 3 weeks. It was over 15 feet for more than 5 weeks. And during that period of time, we had our workers out on the levee 24/7, at least 3 times a day doing inspections to make sure that everything was okay. And we did have a significant number of areas in the lower portion of our district that had some seepage. We monitored that very closely to make sure that there were no problems. We also had to construct a little stability berm at that time near the Chalmette Ferry landing to take care of some problems that might have been developing with the Mississippi River levee in that area. The levees along the river have since been raised in Orleans and Jefferson Parish to the tune of another couple of feet. So even though we didn't have trouble in that 2011 fight, we're even at a higher level today than we were back then. The thing that's going on today that's still a major part of the system is adding the resiliency. And so the Corps came along and put in transitional armoring at the tie-ins of the levees to the flood walls and also behind the flood walls. So that's been done for a while, but now the levees themselves are beginning to be armored. This picture that you see here on the bottom is right out here on the lakefront in New Orleans. That project is well underway. And this is a product called HPTRM, or High Performance Turf Reinforced Mat. And that, combined with the grass, provides a resistance to any type of overtopping erosion that might occur during a significant event. Also, over the course of the past few years, we've been taking advantage of some of the technologies that are out there so that we can alert people to the fact that gates have to be closed, or when gates are going to be open in the system. So we have on our website, we have a section devoted to the navigational floodgates. We have an alert system where we can send emails and text messages out to people who sign up for that to let them know when the navigation gates are going to be closed. And we've also developed, as part of our levee information management system, a module that will keep track of all the floodgates in the system, not just the navigational floodgate, but all the floodgates, over 200 floodgates that have to be closed perhaps during a major event. And that information is transmitted to CPRA as well as to the emergency managers in the area. We also have taken advantage of some newer technology to develop a better database for all of our properties, so we know where we have rights of way. We also are adding to that some of the structures now and some of the gates and things like that, so we're expanding that as time goes by. We're in the process of certifying the non-federal levee system. In fact, the Maxent levee, which is that red line you see on the map there, has already been certified. And FEMA is going to accredit that. The yellow line that you see down there, that's the 40 ARP and back levee system. And the certification effort is well underway on that as well. So for the future, one of the main things that we do is operate and maintain the system. Okay, so we want to do that effectively and cost efficiently, and so we are constantly trying to find ways to improve when it comes to that. We're also trying to use some of the new emerging technologies to help us make better decisions. You've seen some of the things we've done so far. CPRA has embarked upon the I-Levy program. We're looking at some of that work, some of the gauges that are out there, perhaps hardening those gauges so that we can get better information during storm events, things like that. We know that we're going to have to lift levees. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to lift some levees in advance of armoring, but that's not going to be the end of it. We're on a subsiding delta and sea level is rising, so over time, just to maintain the current level of protection that we have, we're going to have to continue to do that. We're also getting ready to embark upon the planning for updating the surge analysis. We know that enough time has gone by that it's time to do that. Technology has advanced. We have better data than we had perhaps when the original work was done. So all those things are going to allow us to do a better job next time around to make those predictions of what a 100-year surge might look like or a 500-year surge might look like. And then beginning in 2023, which is not too far away, we're going to have to go through the recertification process. And so we've been having dialogue with FEMA as well as the Corps to begin that planning effort to get started on that as well. And of course, continuously through all this, we want to make sure that we engage the public and remind them that we still have residual risk. And that this whole thing about flood protection is not just a government thing. It's a shared responsibility. We all have a part to play in that, even as individuals in the community. The other thing that I think is important for people to understand too is that as time goes by, the system is changing. Okay, we are on a delta that is settling, and we're in a time in history when sea level is rising. And so those two combined effects are going to have an impact on how much protection the system can afford us in the future. And so we have to keep an eye on that. We're already getting ready to lift some of the levees that were just recently constructed by the Corps in advance of the armoring program so that they will have at least 10 years of life left in them for armoring before we have to raise them again. But ultimately, we're going to have to raise these levees over time, and we're going to have to adjust our thinking over time as the new technology comes on board, new data becomes available, new predictions are out on sea level rise, and just be nimble enough to react to that and to keep the system where it needs to be to provide at least the design level of protection that we have today.
Tell me, on this 10th anniversary of Katrina, what is it that you want people to know about flood protection in this area?
Well, the primary thing to know is that we're just beginning to develop an adequate flood protection system. We don't have one yet. The system that's in place has been rated as a 100-year protection, which is completely insufficient for a metropolitan area. The protection should be rated much higher. We should be at least at a 500-year or a 1,000-year protection for one of the world's greatest cities. So we're trying to work towards that goal. And what the Corps has given us is really a foundation to begin to develop a true protection system.
What will it take to get to 500-year flood protection?
Well, you can't do it by levees alone. There's just no way you're going to build enough levees high enough. So the things we're looking at doing is developing foreshore protection to knock down the wave action of the incoming storm surge. We're looking at having the city implement building codes that get people up off the ground so that you can tolerate some flooding without having residential damage. We also would like them to develop programs for infrastructure that recover more quickly from inundation. In the last time we had the last storm, one of the problems was that sewer pumping stations went down. And without sewer pumping stations, you don't have sanitary sewer disposal, a really big problem. But there's ways that you can build these pumping stations so that when the flood waters recede, they can come back online much more quickly. So there's a lot of things that have to be done by the community within the flood protection system and then by the flood authority outside the flood protection system. And then finally, we got to make sure that we have all our flood walls and levees hardened sufficiently so that when they are overtopped, they don't get washed away. So we only have to deal with the water that slops over the top. We don't have a problem of a breach.
Tell us, on this 10th anniversary of Katrina, what is it that you would like people to remember?
Well, it's really how much advanced we are now as an organization. There's a lot more documentation requirements because of the inspection system that's been put in place since Katrina, and of course all the additional maintenance that we have to do with all the improvements that have been made in addition to the complex structures. That's been a very big project turned over for the responsibility of the Orleans Levee District to operate and maintain.
What are the priorities going forward now?
Well, we'll continue to fulfill our mission of the operations and maintenance, and also look forward to some of the other construction projects that are ongoing. There's going to be there's a big armoring project that's going on, so we're looking forward to even taking care of the future improvements and maintenance that's going to require.
I have the pleasure of chairing the Coastal Advisory Committee for the SLFPA, and we're always looking for opportunities to partner with local and state and federal entities on improvements to the wetlands that are outside of our levees, because they play such an important role in protecting those levees.
What's going to be done? What has to be done to be able to improve that?
Well, I mean, we have to rebuild a lot of wetlands that have washed away, using the river primarily, and then in other places we have to plant cypress forests to knock down waves. There's a whole range of things we can do that will slow the storm surge coming in and knock out the waves. Right now, the waves are the difference between 100-year and 500-year protection.
As a commissioner representing St. Bernard Parish, I'm proud to say I feel 1,000% safer 10 years later than I did, after experiencing that catastrophic flood that we had for Katrina. With that new flood protection wall that we have surrounding us, it's already been tested during Hurricane Isaac, and it kept us dry, so I'm happy about that.
What are the priorities moving forward?
To maintain them and to make sure that they're in good operating condition and there's no leaks, and that we maintain the level of protection that we have going forward, because we want to be safe. We don't ever want to experience that again.
Well, I want people to understand that the flood protection is in place, and It's the best that it's ever been in the greater New Orleans area, and specifically in St. Bernard Parish. We have an unprecedented construction effort that began right after Katrina. That work is completed, so the protection is in place. And I think residents need to understand that while there's always going to be residual risk, they can feel confident in what we've accomplished and what we continue to do for their safety, lives and property.
What are the priorities going forward to improve that?
The priority is always going to be funding. It's finding that balance of the appropriate amount of funding to properly operate and maintain the system while being responsible with the taxpayers' money. So we just need to make sure that we look at it as a system, we fund it as a system, and we're diligent in doing our job and making sure the operations and maintenance pieces are completed.
Tell us, on this anniversary of Katrina, what is it that you want people to know about flood protection today?
I would definitely want the people of East Jefferson, but also of the entire region, to know that while the system is complete from a 100-year protection perspective, there's always work to be done, and we can never let down our vigilance. And so we continue to make improvements every day throughout the system to keep the residents safe.
What will it take to reach the 500-year flood protection?
It would take a significant investment and a lot of work, engineering work and construction to get there. But if the authority chooses to do that in conjunction with the state and the Corps, anything can be done. It's just a matter of time and money invested. But it certainly could be done.
What are the priorities that you see it going forward now?
For East Jefferson, our current priorities, we have a levee lift program that will be starting shortly along the lakefront in order to maintain the levels of protection that are required up through 2057. We're also working with the Corps to armor our systems along the lakefront and provide resiliency, which does give a higher level of comfort when it comes to flood protection.
New Orleans is a much safer place to live than it has been in recent history, at least. But probably the thing that's most important to know is the system that has been created, which is a robust system, is there mostly to protect your property and the infrastructure, and not really to protect your lives. That's what evacuation's all about.
Tell us regarding the 100-year flood, where does Louisiana and New Orleans stand in regard to protection on that area?
Well, the way the system's designed is you shouldn't get water over the walls or the levees for what we consider to be a flood that's likely to occur once every 100 years. Now, we know that you can actually have that event occur more often than every 100 years, and in fact there's a 1 in 4 chance it will occur every 30 years. So if you're buying a home with a 30-year mortgage, there's a 25% chance during that mortgage that event is going to occur and water will come over the levees.
What kind of assistance is necessary for Washington to enhance flood protection efforts in the New Orleans area?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure Washington is going to do a lot more than they've already done, at least in the near future. We might like them to, but I think at this point, really, we should be looking at what we can do in addition to what Washington has already done, namely elevating homes, better evacuation routes, and a lot of good information when storms come so that people can make wise decisions.
I'd really like to let them know is that the members of the board since Katrina and the SLFPA was organized are professional people that know the business that they're supposed to be governing instead of just political appointees. I'm a civil engineer and land surveyor. I know Steve is also. Some of the other members are really well versed and experts in their field. And I think that is a big help in governing these levee boards, to have people that really know the business.
What do you see as the priorities going forward? What needs to be done to enhance flood protection?
Well, as I've seen, and we've been talking about these last few meetings, is as the levees are continuing to sink at some rate, whatever you debate about, is to continuing to prepare and do the levee lifts to keep the flood protection that it started with.
I think that this board shows how important flood protection is. You know, it's a serious business that has got to be treated like a serious business with professional oversight. I think the members of the board do a great job. I think our staff does a particularly good job, ensuring the fiduciary responsibilities of this board ensuring that business obligations are met and kept is what this board is all about. And I think we've come a long way in the last 10 years to ensure that flood protection is treated with the professionalism that it deserves, because lives matter.
Tell us, what are the major issues going forward now for this area?
Well, we have tremendous maintenance obligations for the structures that we are responsible for, and the day-to-day operations of what we do in flood protection, they don't go away. You know, just because flood protection isn't the sexiest topic out there doesn't mean that people don't need to take it seriously. That's the function of this board.
What would you like people to keep in mind regarding the ongoing work and the necessity for continued flood protection for the New Orleans area?
What we see today is the result of a lot of hard work, and without continued focus on operations and maintenance and professional review of all of the aspects of this business, we could find ourselves in a tough spot. I think it's important that this board continue to operate with as much seriousness as it does so that we can be on top of key issues.
What kind of assistance is going to be necessary from Washington to reach 500-year flood protection?
I don't think we can expect anything from Washington. The nation has spent almost $15 billion in our flood protection system. We have to look to ourselves. You know, my granddad used to say, if you want a helping hand, the first place to look is at the end of your arm. So we're going to have to do it ourselves. And there's ways to do it that are affordable, but we have to address them. We have to be serious about it. All the interior things I talked about, getting houses up off the ground, using building codes that are more recoverable under inundation. Those are things that we can do. We can implement those today without a significant increase in cost, and we can't expect any dollars from Washington. The foreshore protection, there's things that we can do with income that we have, or with the CPRA, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, the money that they have. Washington, D.C. is not going to be a source of income. We've dried that well up.
Going forward in the future, what are the priorities? What needs to happen maybe at the federal level to assist?
Well, the cost sharing between the federal government and local entities is an issue. We have some issues with management and of some of the structures, so that's an issue. I would say coastal restoration and protection is a huge issue, and it's not as if New Orleans and South Louisiana is maybe a small city in a distant location somewhere that's unconnected to, unaffected by other regions. Here, New Orleans and the whole Gulf South generate economic development, and it is really the lifeblood of most of the rest of the country, right, in terms of the port and the energy industry. So it's critical for the entire United States that this area be protected. Please go to our website, www.slfpae.com.